They really thought that my mind is always on music and dancing, and it usually is, but they never thought that this performer, myself, would outthink them.
With the news of Drake suing Universal Music Group for defamation in the aftermath of his loss to Kendrick Lamar during their 2024 rap beef, it led me to think about other instances of when artists went against their label and came out on top, or suffered the brutal consequences of fighting the machine that has the power and resources to make or break your career. One of the most infamous examples of this was the vicious feud between Michael Jackson and his label Sony in the early 2000s. This is a battle I've always heard about and have read about the various conspiracy theories about how people believe Sony, among other powerful entities, conspired against Michael, which ultimately led to his untimely demise, but I never knew the actual details. Before we dive into the actual dispute between the two entities, we first need to go back to the early 80s when Michael was beginning to take a keen interest in music ownership and finding ways in which he could expand his business portfolio. In 1954, when the London-based television network Associated Broadcast Development Company had gained approval to expand their coverage to weekends, as well as expand their audience to the Midlands part of Europe, the network found itself underfunded to be able to commence their expansion until media executive Lou Grade and his co-partners swooped in with their production company, Incorporated Television Company. They merged with ABD to officially form Associated Television, known as ATV, which officially aired in 1955 in the United Kingdom. In 1957, ATV continued to get bigger when they established a music publishing division titled ATV Music. In the 1960s, I'm pretty sure it is well known that the English band The Beatles were among the biggest and most popular musical acts on the planet. With their massive international notoriety and commercial success throughout the entire decade of the 60s, the two main songwriters of the group, John Lennon and Paul McCartney, were levied with massive tax expenses in Britain that costed them 90% of their song earnings. Paul and John were soon faced with the ultimatum to either sell their rights to their publishing or to form a public company to divert their tax burdens that would also allow them to make more money later down the line. They chose the latter option and soon founded the publishing company Northern Songs in 1963, alongside their partners, publisher Dick James and their manager Brian Epstein. Though the company provided temporary relief for their tax issues, problems arose for John and Paul when their co-partner and manager, Brian, died in 1967, and they had plans to renegotiate their contract with their third remaining partner, Dick James. Unfortunately, in 1969, Dick James went behind the back of Paul and John to sell their shares of Northern Songs to ATV Music, in which ATV ended up buying the majority stock for $1.8 million and now owned about 250 Beatles songs. John found out about the sale through the newspaper and notified Paul immediately. Throughout the years, Paul, John, and later his widow, Yoko Ono, unsuccessfully attempted to regain their controlling interest in Northern Songs, but failed as they were outsized financially by the new owner, Lou Grade. The battle to regain control remained unsuccessful as Paul and John were bound by the Northern Songs contract to continue songwriting until 1973. Frustrated by the whole ordeal, they both sold their stock in the company in 1969, officially wiping their hands clean of the company that they founded and the songs that they wrote. ATV Music was later sold to Australia's first billionaire, Robert Holmes à Court, in 1985, in which at that point the catalog comprised of over 4,000 songs. In 1978, Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson first met at a boat party. They lost contact but reconnected in the early 1980s when the pair collaborated to record a few songs and music videos, which included Michael's song The Girl Is Mine and Paul's songs The Man and the #1 hit song Say Say Say. During the production of Say 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 was when Paul and Michael's relationship grew closely. Paul invited Michael to London, where they recorded in the famous Abbey Road studios, and Michael temporarily stayed at a hotel that was coincidentally across the street from the ATV Music Publishing Company that controlled the Beatles catalog. At times, Michael ate dinner at Paul's house and shared moments of helping to cook with Paul, his wife Linda, and their children. One night, Paul and Michael sat at the dinner table when Paul pulled out a thick booklet of song and publishing rights he owned, which include the works of Buddy Holly that helped to earn Paul an additional $40 million a year from other people's songs. This transformative discussion taught Michael of the profitable world of music publishing and ownership that was an extremely valuable investment. Apparently, Paul told Michael, "This is the way to make big money. Every time someone records one of these songs, I get paid. Every time someone plays these songs on the radio or in a live performance, I get paid." This was a valuable conversation for Michael, as the Beatles were among one of the very first musical acts to own their publishing. Michael's former accountant and business manager, Marshall Gelfand, once said, "You've got to remember that when the Beatles started, nobody in this business owned their own publishing. It wasn't until the mid-60s when artists like Bob Dylan and the Beatles started recording their own songs and selling millions of albums that advisors began to understand the importance of holding on to your own publishing. The key thing to remember today is don't sell your catalog. The whole explosion of music videos and the trend toward using more music in movies is going to make copyrights even more valuable. If you are an established artist today, you should only consider selling your catalog as the last resort to raise cash. During the next couple of months after that meeting with Paul in 1983, Michael worked with his manager John Branca to compile a list of available songs for sales, which included Sly Stone's collection, as well as songs Everyday People and Everybody is a Star, in addition to Len Barry's songs such as 123 and Soul Survivors, Express Your Way to Your Heart, and 2 songs by Dion DiMucci, The Wanderer, and Run Around Sue, all of which he purchased for less than $1 million. Throughout 1983 to 1984, Michael declined a lot of songs that were open for sale, as he only preferred songs that meant something personal to him. Throughout 1984, Michael was consumed with the Jackson's Victory Tour until a memorable September 1984 meeting in which Michael's lawyer, Branca, notified him that the ATV catalog was available, which included Northern songs, which as we now know included the Beatles catalog. Even though Branca warned Michael that it would be a struggle to go after their catalog due to possible other competitors, Michael did not care and confirmed to his team of lawyers to begin engaging in what would become an almost year-long battle to win the ultimate prize. Despite bids from other competitors from Paul McCartney himself, Charles Koppelman and Marty Bandier's New York-based entertainment company, the London-based Virgin Records, New York real estate tycoon Samuel J. Elfrack, and financier Charles Knapp, coupled with weeks without formal communication and threats of walking away from the bidding, Michael and his team offered a $46 million bid for the ATV music catalog on November 20th, 1984. Both parties, Robert's team and Michael's team, met a month later on December 14th in London to draft a contract that would allow Michael's team to undergo an intensive 4-month-long verification process of ATV's legal and financial reports of the complete composition of each of the 4,000-plus songs to ensure that all the copyrights are in order. This $1 million inquiry was extensive and led to the examination of an estimated 500,000 to 1 million pages of contracts that were analyzed. Though this process was time-consuming, it gave the Jackson team a leg up as they were able to complete their due diligence before any other competitor. Well into 1985, both parties were still playing tug-of-war with their negotiations, in which Robert further complicated things with his last-minute demands. With the threat of another competitor bidding up to $50 million for the catalog, Michael increased his bid by $1.5 million, which led Robert accepting Michael's offer since he acted faster and had his ducks in a row with examining the books, and also by throwing in some other assets in which he agreed to set up a scholarship in Jackson's name at a U.S. university. Eventually, on August 10, 1985, at 2:45 a.m., a contract was finally signed for the acquisition of ATV Music's 4,000-song catalog for $47.5 million, in which Michael became the owner of the Beatles' 250 songs, as well as other songs by Bruce Springsteen, Cher, Pat Benatar, Little Richard, Elvis Presley, and the Rolling Stones. The contract, which was described by industry experts as one of the largest music acquisitions ever by an individual, was finalized with the provision that Michael and Robert would meet for the very first time at a widely publicized charity telethon in Australia.
Janet Holmes-a-Court remembers the deal her husband made. Robert Holmes-a-Court would sell the superstar a rare musical catalogue, including a Beatles collection. In return, Michael Jackson would fly to Perth for telethon.
In November 1987, after months of speculation and negotiations, CBS sold its extremely profitable recording division to Sony Corporation for $2 billion cash, given Sony's success with audio and visual hardware in the entertainment industry. With a roster that included Michael Jackson, Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, and Barbra Streisand, the deal was finalized in 1988, and the company was later renamed to Sony Music Entertainment in 1991. However, there was speculation that with the acquisition, artists on the label were concerned what that meant for the longtime president and CEO of CBS Records, Walter Yentenkov, who many artists such as Michael and Cyndi Lauper were only loyal to Walter and not CBS. There were even reports that Michael had a key man clause in his contract stating that he was obliged to CBS Records only as long as Walter was there. Walter has always been a staunch advocate for Michael, as he was the one who threatened MTV he would pull all of CBS Records acts from MTV if the station did not air the video to Billie Jean. However, in 1990, Walter resigned from the company and his protege Tommy Mottola took over as the CEO of Sony Music beginning that year. That same year, it was widely reported that Michael Jackson was in the process of negotiating a lucrative new contract with CBS Records that would eclipse every other contract in the music business. It was speculated that Michael, who had been with CBS Records since 1976, was seeking a special production deal with higher royalty rates than the industry standard, as he reportedly sought out royalties of more than $2.50 per album, whereas at the time, the pop music royalty rates ranged from $1 to $1.50 per album. At this point, Michael received a historic 25% royalty rate compared to the 20% that artists like Madonna had. Aside from being the biggest superstar on the planet, Michael had leverage given the departure of his longtime advocate at the label, Walter Yentenkov, as well as the fact that other labels like MCA and Warner Music could potentially swoop him off the market. And lastly, because his superstar baby sister, Janet, was also in the midst of contract negotiations, industry experts thought it would be a possibility that Janet may decide to sign to a label owned by her brother. After 9 months of negotiations, in March of 1991, Michael re-signed with Sony for a long-term 6-album deal with an estimated valuation of $1 billion and an $18 million investment fee for his next album. Though the contract did not specify the length of the deal, in terms of years, the multimedia contract extends to film, calling for Michael to film short films based off his songs, directed by acclaimed directors like David Lynch and Tim Burton, followed by Michael starring in a full-length musical action adventure, as well as a Jackson Entertainment complex as a hub for Michael to record and work on wide-ranging records, film, and TV. In addition to Michael owning his own subsidiary label titled Nation Records to sign new and established artists. Additionally, according to an industry insider, the deal is what the movie business calls all back-end. Jackson received no advance and no money was exchanged. In return, the source said he was given the highest royalty rate ever, significantly more than the previous record of 20%, granted to Jackson himself by CBS Records. The more successful Jackson is, the more money he will receive. There were some industry insiders who felt it would be difficult for Michael to live up to the demands of the contract due to his reclusive nature, his reluctance to perform on stage or even appear publicly to promote his records, given that the improved contract would essentially require Michael to sell at least 6 to 7 million copies of each of his albums just to break even. Eventually, a few months later, Michael released his long-awaited follow-up to Bad with his November 1991 album Dangerous, which sold 5 million copies worldwide in his first week alone. Throughout the early 1990s, things started to get pretty crazy for Michael, to say the least. I'm not going to delve deep into his tumultuous legal battles, but with the first allegation of child abuse in late 1993, it started a years-long firestorm with legal troubles for Michael that not only significantly impacted his reputation, but also had a detrimental and costly effect on his finances as well. Though Michael was never formally charged with any crime, the first set of allegations levied against Michael by the Chandler family initially was an extortion of $20 million for them not to go public with the allegations. And it later led to an investigation by LAPD after the boy's psychiatrist reported to the authorities after he described the abuse to her. A few months later, the family followed through with a $30 million lawsuit against Michael. Michael later settled with the family for an undisclosed amount in 1994, but about 10 years later, during his second court battle with new child abuse allegations, it was revealed that Michael agreed to pay $25 million in an out-of-court settlement, which was at the time protected by a gag order. When you take into account the settlement, the maintenance of running his Neverland Ranch at that time that costed $10 million a year, his humanitarianism, his divorce settlement, and expensive lavish lifestyle expenses, and Michael reportedly spending up to $65 million of video projects, as well as having at the time the most expensive album promotional campaign at $30 million for his 1995 album History. Many people believe Michael's alleged financial issues is what led to the bombshell November 1995 news when it was announced that Michael's publishing company, ATV Music, has entered into a 50-50 joint venture with Sony. Michael has sold a 50% stake of the current and future songs of ATV Music catalog, which comprised of over 200,000 songs, in which the company was now called Sony ATV Music Publishing. That had a newly combined asset of about $500 million, leading the company to become the third largest publishing company in the industry at that time. In return, Michael received about $90 million to $100 million for the deal, and his own musical catalog was safe and exempt in his separate MyJack Music Publishing Company. To debunk the rumors on Michael's finances being in disarray, his team stated that Michael is like a huge corporation. He has debt and he has cash flow. Not only is he far from being cash-strapped, but what he earns daily from interest alone likely could run most large entertainment companies. Although Michael's History album went number 1 on the pop charts, as well as 18 other countries, and also featured Michael becoming the first artist to have a single debut at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, and embarking on his last tour, the History World Tour, which grossed $165 million, becoming the highest grossing solo tour of the 1990s, and going on to eventually sell over 20 million copies worldwide, critics still took note of his album failing to live up to the controversial $30 million budget and lackluster chart performance in the US, as the album was knocked from the number 1 spot after 2 weeks due to the Pocahontas soundtrack. Either way, throughout the late 1990s, Michael continued to fulfill his contract obligations by releasing the Blood on the Dance Floor remix album in 1997, which eventually became the best-selling remix album in history. Then in 2000, Michael released a Best of Michael Jackson compilation album. Towards the end of the late 1990s, reports began to surface that Michael had taken out hundreds of millions of dollars worth of loans. In an article from the New York Times, it said, documents indicate that by late 1998, Mr. Jackson had already taken out and depleted a $90 million bank loan, and Mi Young-ho Lee, a Korean advisor, arranged a new $150 million loan from Bank of America that was collateralized by the Beatles catalog and used to pay off earlier debts. Just several months later, the $140 million loan had evaporated, and Mr. Jackson, fresh off his divorce settlement with Lisa Marie Presley, obtained another $30 million line of credit from Bank of America. Mr. Lee said in court papers that in late 2000, he raised the original $140 million bank loan to $200 million, using part of the loan to pay down the $30 million credit line, which had been entirely tapped. In the early 2000s, Michael's financial woes continued, as it was rumored that in 2001, he used his half of the ATV assets as collateral to secure $200 million in loans from Bank of America to help cover the maintenance for Neverland Ranch, and that as a result of borrowing even more large sums of money, the company, Union Finance and Investment Corporation, sued Michael for $12 million in unpaid fees and expenses. Typically reluctant to provide statements to the press, Michael cleared up this rumor by saying, "I want to clarify a silly rumor. The Beatles catalog is not for sale, has not been for sale, and will never be for sale." Unfortunately, things got even worse for Michael beginning in 2001 when he was gearing up to release his 10th and ultimately final solo album, titled Invincible. Production for the album took about 4 years and cost $30 million to produce, which resulted in the album still topping the list as the most expensive album ever made. Initially, it was reported that the label provided the album with a budget of $25 million for the promotion of the album, but things went haywire with the relationship between Michael and Sony for a few different reasons. It was reported that Michael initially agreed to go on tour for this album in the US and Europe, and then later changed his mind, though there are conflicting reports that Sony was the one that prevented Michael from going on tour. I will add that we all remember the famous clip of Michael's private home videos when he stated how much he hates the tour.
Support your album and go on tour. And I don't like to. I do like relating to the fans, giving the fans a chance to see you face to face.
Just the negative saying that you don't like the tour, just 'cause
I don't like it though.
I know, but
I go through hell.
Also, in February 2001, Michael was scheduled to do a 10-day promotional pop-up in Europe, but ended up canceling. Sources also claim that Michael backed out from appearing on all but one black media outlet. It was also reported that Michael was angry that his $8 million video proposal for the supposed lead single on the album, Unbreakable, featuring Notorious B.I.G., was rejected by the label, which was followed by a video proposal from Sony for Michael to create a video for the single Butterflies since it was doing well on the radio, in which Michael declined. One other reason was that when Jackson showed up a day late to the set of the You Rock My World video and left early, it forced Sony to hire a body double to finish the video, which ran about $3 million over budget. In October, the singer failed to show up at the set of his Cry video, which the company was forced to shoot without his participation. Both videos fell quickly out of rotation on MTV. Another final reason was that it was speculated Sony and Tommy Mottola canceled the 9/11 benefit single What More Can I Give, which was led by Michael and a supergroup of other popular artists, including Mariah Carey. At this point, despite the album selling 5 million copies worldwide in its first 6 or 7 months, and the widely watched 2001 Michael Jackson 30th anniversary celebration, everything related to the promotion of Invincible came to an abrupt stop at the beginning of 2002, as Michael and his lawyers were negotiating with Sony of how to release Michael from his contract.
So if Michael would have had his fair shake, because you know, they went on not to promote. Like, Michael had a vision. Like, I was part of it. I remember him saying, we're going to come out with this first, and we're going to shoot a short film, The Threat, and we're going to shoot a short film. Yeah, with Unbreakable, and I'm going to have Biggie, because I had the Biggie verse, and I'm going to have Biggie in the video in a hologram type form. He had all his vision. So when I look at that, I'm like, yo, he didn't get a chance to promote because whatever business wasn't right at that time.
Above all these reasons aforementioned were two significant set of assets that made the dispute with Sony acrimonious. First, Michael wanted to take the possession of his catalog of master recordings in 3 years, reduced from the period of at least 7 years in his contract that would have ended in 2010. Owning those rights would have stopped him from having to split royalty payments with Sony as he does at that point. The second major asset was the complicated venture of the Sony ATV Music Partnership, which also recently bought the rights of 55,000 country songs. It was speculated that Michael had approached Sony about acquiring his 50% stake in the music publishing business, which Sony rejected, and it was also rumored that Sony would like to own Michael's share, which he had refused to sell. Things continued to sour between the two parties in 2002 as Michael enlisted the support of lawyer Johnny Cochran and Reverend Al Sharpton to support him in his battle against Sony. They started a coalition to recruit other big-name artists to speak out about the exploitive practices that major labels practice. Critics called out Michael for being a fake artist rights activist as they felt his public admonishment of Sony was self-motivated since he was piggybacking off the current artist rights movement to pressure Sony into breaking its contract. Though Sony executives said Michael was free to go at the end of his contract, Michael took his spectacle up a notch by participating in several public protests, rallies, and demonstrations against Sony outside of their headquarters, and by attending events held by Reverend Al Sharpton at his Music Industry Summit and National Action Network events, in which he continued disparaging Sony and its CEO, Tommy Mottola, by also highlighting their plans to combat racism in the music industry during his infamous London speech.
Owning half of Sony. So, I own half of Sony's publishing and I'm leaving them, and they're very angry at me because of it, but I just did good business, you know.
Eventually, after several public speeches and condemnations of calling Tommy a racist and devil throughout the summer of 2002, the two parties never ended up suing each other, but Michael was able to leave as a free agent. Aside from releasing his #1 compilation album in 2003, that year was the beginning of even more legal troubles for Michael as he sued his former label Motown and Universal Music Group for the pre-1976 royalties in excess of over $100,000 of songs and solo performances that was contractually agreed to be paid out to the Jackson 5 as they waived their rights to the pre-1976 recordings. 2003 got even worse for Michael as he faced a second bout of child abuse allegations, in which at this time he was charged and faced a highly publicized trial throughout the following 2 years, which resulted in him being acquitted on all charges. One could assume, due to the growing legal fees plus other lifestyle expenses, it was reported that Michael's finances still remained shaky going into 2005, as it was reported that he had been delinquent on his loan repayments to Bank of America, which later sold the loan portfolio to a company called Fortress Investments, a private equity firm specializing in distressed debt. Michael then turned to the second son of the King of Bahrain, Abdullah bin Hamad Al Khalifa, to request his help for a place to stay post-trial and for assistance to pay the Neverland bills. After the friendship turned into litigation, after Abdullah requested the $7 million he loaned to Michael to be paid back after a failed business endeavor, Michael was forced to settle with him and had to sadly turn to his partnership with Sony for support. After news was reported that Michael had to lay off workers at Neverland Ranch and had a debt load in the ballpark of $270 million, it was soon announced in 2006 that Michael agreed to give Sony his half of the 50% stake in the Sony ATV Music Publishing that was worth $1 billion at that point to Sony as a part of the $325 million debt refinancing package to help avoid bankruptcy and to help Michael pay off his multi-million-dollar debts to Fortress Investments. Over the next 2 years, Sony ATV continued to invest in lucrative catalogs by purchasing the administration rights of the company Famous Music, formerly owned by Viacom, which contained 125,000 songs, which included songs by Eminem, Pink, and Shakira. Unfortunately, as we all know, Michael Jackson passed away on June 25, 2009, just 3 weeks shy before his comeback This Is It tour was scheduled to commence in London. When he died, it was reported that Michael was over $500 million in debt. Along with that, it was reported that from June 2001 through June 2009, Michael's debt increased about $170 million, with annual interest on his loans growing over the years, ranging from a little less than 7% to 16.8%. To get his estate back in order, Michael's longtime attorney, John Branca and John McClain, took control of his estate to fix his dire financial strains. The estate worked on repaying the concert promoter AEG for the $40 million they were owed and resolved 65 creditor claims and lawsuits. In 2012, Sony ATV partnered with the Jackson estate to finalize a $2.2 billion deal for the purchase of the EMI Music Publishing that provided Sony ATV with 1.3 million additional publishing rights, further establishing Sony ATV as a top music publishing company in the business. 3 years later, in 2015, Sony began the process to trigger the buy-sell process with the Michael Jackson estate to buy Michael's stake in the Sony ATV catalog. Then a year later, in 2016, much to the disappointment of many Michael fans across the world, it was officially announced that Sony Corporation was officially set to buy out Michael's treasured 50% stake of the Sony ATV Music Publishing for $750 million. With this acquisition, Sony gained 100% control over his music publishing catalog, but thankfully the Jackson estate was still able to fully control the rights of My Jack Music, which is a company that held all of Michael's songs and other songs he acquired during his lifetime. And they were able to retain a 10% stake in EMI Music Publishing. Well, not for long, because 2 years later in 2018, it was revealed in an earnings notice. Sony revealed that month they acquired the estate's 9.8% holdings in EMI for $287.5 million, which will make EMI a wholly owned subsidiary of Sony. Things eventually got worse for the millions of MJ fans who hoped this day wouldn't come on February 9th, 2024, when it was announced that Sony had completed a transaction to acquire half of Michael's publishing recording catalog, along with the works of other artists like Ray Charles and Curtis Mayfield from his MyJack Music Company for around $1.2 billion, in which they paid $600 million to the estate. Michael's mother tried to put a stop to the sale by objecting to the transaction, in which the appellate court stated that it is in Michael's will that the estate has the broad powers to buy and sell estate assets in the estate's best interest. Catherine argued that the sale was against her son's wishes, but unfortunately her appeal was rejected by the court, as the executors of the estate had the power to make those decisions. As we all know by this point in the video, Michael treasured his catalog of his own music and the music of artists he adored. He fought relentlessly with the label and dealt with the attacks and scrutiny over the years for the fact that he held so much control and leverage over the industry. The truth of the matter is, Michael had a target on his back from the minute he purchased the ATV Music catalog in 1985. He knew the value and pressure that came with being already the most famous musician in the world, but now being the most famous musician who held the musical catalog to the biggest band of all time, which was the Beatles. This video was such a fascinating music history lesson for me because we all hear about Michael's infamous feud with Sony in 2001, but I rarely hear about the backstory of what led to that dispute and his ultimate demise in 2009. I have no doubt that the powers that be helped to actively contribute to Michael's decline in the 2000s. As Michael said during the height of his feud with Sony, once I started breaking sales records, I broke Elvis Presley's record, I broke the Beatles record. Once I started doing that overnight, they called me a freak, a homosexual, a child. They said I bleached my skin. They did everything they could to turn the public against me. It's a conspiracy. I know my race. I look in the mirror and I know that I'm black. Please let me know in the comments what you all think about how this whole ordeal with Michael Jackson and Sony Music played out. Do you think the target Michael had on his back contributed to his passing? What do you really think was at play throughout the 90s and early 2000s with Michael's legal drama and feud with Sony? Do you think it has helped or hurt Michael's brand and legacy that Sony purchased the rights to his music? Are you excited to watch the upcoming Michael biopic scheduled for release in theaters this year? Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on your notification bell, and I'll see you next time.